Welcome to OLevels Economics Unit 29 Economic Growth. Economic growth refers to an increase in the total output of goods and services produced in a country over time. The most common way of measuring this output is through gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP is the total output produced within a country during a specific period. Economists measure GDP using three methods: the output method, the income method, and the expenditure method. In theory, all three methods should produce the same result because of the circular flow of income. If an economy produces goods worth a certain amount, this production generates incomes for workers and firms, and those incomes are then spent on the goods and services produced in the economy. The output method calculates GDP by adding up the value of output produced by all industries in a country. However, economists must avoid double counting. For example, the value of a car already includes the value of steel and tyres used in its production. To avoid counting these values more than once, economists measure the value added at each stage of production. The income method measures GDP by adding together all the incomes earned in producing goods and services, such as wages, rent, interest, and profit. Transfer payments like pensions and unemployment benefits are excluded because they are not payments for producing goods or services. The expenditure method calculates GDP by adding up all spending on a country's finished output. This includes consumption by households, investment by firms, government spending, and exports minus imports. Exports are added because they represent spending by foreigners on the country's goods, while imports are subtracted since they are produced outside the country and do not generate income for domestic residents. When GDP is first calculated, it is usually measured as nominal GDP, also called money GDP or GDP at current prices. Nominal GDP measures output using the prices that exist at the time and is not adjusted for inflation. Because of this, it can give a misleading impression of economic performance. For example, if prices rise significantly while the quantity of goods produced remains the same, nominal GDP will also rise even though real output has not increased. To obtain a more accurate picture, economists calculate real GDP. Real GDP adjusts nominal GDP for inflation, so that changes reflect actual changes in production. This gives GDP at constant prices and provides a better measure of economic growth. Another useful measure is real GDP per head, also known as real GDP per capita. A rise in real GDP does not necessarily mean that people are better off if the population is also increasing. Real GDP per head is calculated by dividing real GDP by the population. This measure helps economists assess changes in living standards. If real GDP grows faster than the population, real GDP per head rises, and people generally enjoy higher living standards. However, if population growth is faster than economic growth, the amount of goods and services available per person may actually fall. Measuring real GDP is not always easy, because official figures often underestimate the true level of output. This happens because of unrecorded economic activity and non-marketed goods and services. Some economic activities are not recorded because businesses operate on a small scale or choose not to register to avoid taxes or regulations. Other activities may be illegal, such as drug dealing or work done by people without official permission. Even legal work may go unreported if individuals want to avoid paying taxes. In addition, some goods and services are produced but not sold in markets. For example, people who grow food for their own consumption, clean their own homes, or repair their own cars are producing goods and services that are not included in GDP. Sometimes economies experience the opposite of growth, which is known as a recession. A recession occurs when real GDP falls for 6 months or more, which is equal to 2 consecutive quarters of declining output. During a recession, fewer goods and services are produced than before. Recessions may occur because of a decrease in aggregate demand or a decrease in aggregate supply. A fall in aggregate demand may occur if consumer spending and investment decline due to low confidence, financial crises, or falling house prices. Government spending may also fall, or exports may decline if the exchange rate rises and makes goods more expensive abroad. A recession may also occur due to a decrease in aggregate supply, such as a rise in fuel or raw material costs that increases firms' production costs and reduces output. Recessions have several negative consequences for an economy. When output falls, unemployment usually rises as firms require fewer workers. Lower output and income reduce living standards and discourage investment. Government finances are also affected as tax revenues fall while spending on benefits such as unemployment support increases. This can lead to a larger budget deficit. The effect on the price level depends on the cause of the recession. If the recession is caused by a decrease in aggregate demand, the price level may fall. However, if it is caused by a decrease in aggregate supply, it may occur alongside rising prices. Economic growth itself can occur for several reasons. In the short run, growth may result from an increase in aggregate demand, especially if the economy has unused resources. For example, higher consumer confidence or a reduction in income tax may increase spending and encourage firms to raise their output. In the long run, however, economic growth requires an increase in the quantity or quality of resources. The quantity of resources can increase through higher investment in capital goods or an increase in the labour force. The quality of resources can improve through better education, training, and technological progress, which increase productivity and expand the economy's productive capacity. Economic growth can bring several benefits. Higher output means that more goods and services are available, which can improve people's living standards. People in richer economies tend to enjoy better healthcare, improved education, and access to a wider range of goods and services. In poorer countries, economic growth is essential for providing basic necessities. Growth also increases government tax revenue, making it easier for governments to reduce poverty, improve healthcare systems, and invest in education without raising tax rates. As an economy grows, its economic and political influence in the world may also increase. However, economic growth can also involve costs. If an economy is already operating at full capacity, resources may need to shift from producing consumer goods to producing capital goods in order to expand productive capacity. In the short run, this may reduce the number of consumer goods available to households. Economic growth can also increase pollution, lead to the depletion of non renewable resources, and damage the natural environment. Expanding industries and infrastructure may destroy forests, wildlife habitats, and natural ecosystems. For this reason, economists increasingly emphasize the importance of sustainable economic growth, which aims to increase output while protecting the environment and preserving resources for future generations. It is important to understand the difference between a fall in the economic growth rate and a fall in output. If a country's economic growth rate falls from 5% to 3%, output is still increasing, but at a slower rate. Output only falls when the growth rate becomes negative. For example, a growth rate of negative 2% means that the economy produced 2% less output than in the previous year. Governments can use several policies to promote economic growth. If an economy has spare capacity, expansionary fiscal policy or expansionary monetary policy may be used to increase aggregate demand. For example, reducing taxes or lowering interest rates can encourage higher consumer spending and business investment. This increase in demand encourages firms to expand production and hire more workers. However, the success of these policies depends on factors such as consumer and business confidence. In the long run, sustained economic growth requires increases in productive capacity. Therefore, governments also use supply-side policies, such as improving education and training, to increase productivity and expand the economy's productive potential. However, it is important to note that supply-side policy measures do not always guarantee success. Improving education and training, for instance, may take many years before the benefits are fully realized. In addition, if only supply-side policies are used, growth may be limited due to lack of demand. As a result, while supply-side policies have the potential to promote long-term economic growth, their outcomes are not always certain. Hence, they should be paired with demand-side policies. Thanks for watching.